So now we are ready to start. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So let's begin. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Digital Futures Young Scholar Symposium. My name is Chao Yan. I'm an assistant professor at Tongji University. Actually, it's a really great pleasure to be here, moderate the panel with the guest speakers. I actually know of them very well. Rong Segal, Niro, Wang Liang, and David, welcome. Thank you for being here. So before we start, I just want to take a couple of minutes to introduce our new journal, Architectural Intelligence. The journal is sponsored by Tongji University and published with Springer. Now it's calling for scientific researches in the field of digital architecture. So please follow us on our website for the incongruent issue, and also submit your manuscript if you have related works. Back to our events today. Today is actually the third session of the Digital Futures Young Scholar Symposium series. For those who are not really familiar with the event, Digital Futures is a kind of online platform for scholars around the world to come together and exchanging ideas. For the past 12 years, we have been hosting lectures, workshops, exhibitions here in Shanghai. And for the past 2 years, due to the COVID, we turned everything online. So in terms of the lecture series, every summer we invite leading figures of the field to give lectures. This year we have the great lineup of speakers, including Patrick Schumacher, Antoine Picon, Mario Capel, etc., etc. Also, every summer we invite young scholars to present their most cutting-edge works and to have debates and discussions. This weekend we have 4 panels between young scholars. This is the third one, the theme of which is hybrid forms and virtual architecture. So before we start, I just want to have a few words about the theme. I think in general, the panel is intended to reinterpret form in contemporary architectural discourse, where I would argue form is neither purely in the sense of formalistic autonomy, nor simply with this bounding relationship to matter and material performance anymore. But now it's deeply associated with new medias, including models, animations, films, installations, virtual reality, even game environment and metaverse. So through those new medias, form is now associated with conceptual, cultural in a broader sense, and political factors. Also through these new medias, the relationship between form and matter has been twisted dramatically. We see more and more blurred boundaries between the physical and the simulated, between different scales. And then third, also through those new medias, I would argue the boundary of architecture itself is expanded. We see more close connections between architecture with other art forms, for example, new media arts, conceptual arts, for stage art in certain sense, and film for sure, etc. So in one sentence, form is now not only hybrid, but also produce hybridities. So to represent and discuss the current state of form in architecture, we invited 4 speakers today. Each of them is related to the theme in a different and unique way, and each of them will give a presentation in roughly 20 minutes, and in the end we will join together to have some kind of roundtable discussion. Now I will introduce the speakers one by one. Our first speaker is Wang Zigong. Zigong is an associate professor at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in China. He's also the founder and principal architect of Pills, a studio focusing on contemporary spatial culture through practice and research. Zigong has also taught at Beijing Film Academy as a lecturer and also Tsinghua University and Syracuse University as visiting professors. Our second speaker is David Askanati. David is a full-time faculty at SciArc teaching design studio and visual studies. He leads his own practice desk, which is a firm based in Los Angeles, and its current projects in California and Mexico. David has been awarded the League Prize from the Architecture League of New York. He was also the teaching and research fellow in several universities, including the University of Michigan, the Ohio State University, etc. Our third speaker is Wang Liang. Wang Liang is an architect and urban designer. He is currently a doctoral candidate of the DDES program at the Harvard GSD. He also taught at the Harvard GSD and Syracuse University as teaching and research fellows. In addition to his academic experience, Wang Liang is also the co-founder of Commons Office, a creative thinking tank and a research-based design practice. Finally, our last speaker, Nirohi. Nirohi is an architectural designer and a multimedia artist. He has been studying architecture and design in the United States and Denmark. Now he leads his own creative practice, Hexagon, whose work has been exhibited in various countries. Nirohi is currently a visiting professor at Virginia Polytech Institute of State University. Also as a collaborator with Testa and Weather, he also teaches studio and seminars at SciArc. So now, I think with no further ado, I will give the screen to our first presenter, Wang Zigong. Please. I will stop sharing.
Okay. Let me share the screen. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to Professor Yuan Feng for the invitation and the Professor Yan Chao for the hosting. And my work includes architecture, art, and exhibition, education, etc. Not many buildings have actually been built. So this is maybe this is common for the young architects in the United States. That is kind of not a typical architect in China. So people usually think of me as an installation artist or an architect without architecture, something like that. And maybe Professor Yuan think I was the right person to talk about this topic. But unfortunately, my work is not really directly related to the metaverse and virtual reality, etc. But I would love to see the works and thoughts of the other people in the US and keep in touch with them. So next, I will talk about a few projects we are working on. Okay, the first is an interesting small project. And this semester, I taught a class called Learning from the Theme Parks at CAFA. And we believe that the theme parks are the ultimate expression of fantasy and consumption. And coincidentally, after this class, Disney and UCCA gave me a commission to do an installation about Mickey Mouse, and they have an exhibition about Mickey Mouse. So they commissioned some artist to do a work. So you can notice that there, you can notice that the right picture, it seems to be some perspective problem in the patent drawing of Mickey's image. And so this problem actually related to his classic figurative nature of the two circle with his air and one circle with his head. So Mickey's air keeping facing the audience, even in the 3D animation. So interestingly, for the 3D dimensional animation, his head and airs each follow a different rule of perspective and movement. So this is a complete violation of the law of physics, which makes 3D Mickey Mouse is impossible in the real world. So this is this specialty of Mickey's head and his ears is the starting point of our design. So we want to restore the phenomenon in the real world. His ears needs two axes of upward motion. So we have tried many means to achieve this result, and we decided to use a monitor, actually two monitors, to drive these airs in both axes of rotation, and to use a radar to detect the position of the audience. And then we will apply a material similar to the Wanta black to make the three-dimensional sculpture like two-dimensional. And this material can absorb more than 99% of the light. And this is some of the production process. And this work is still in production and will be exhibited next month. And the following work is a commission for the last year's China contemporary architecture installation and video work exhibition. It's called Black Maria. So historically, Black Maria is the first film studio invented by Thomas Edison in 1897, which also means black prison car in English. And we use this name on one hand indicate borrowing of the film industry, film tools, and on the other hand suggest that the man is a kind of a human being dilemma in the voluntarily prisoner of the system. So we hope to use the model as a metaphor for the alienate relationship between the systematic people and the supply system. So in other words, it suggests a certain way of the world operating in. So this is the final work. And Black Maria is kind of a metaphor of a space that is not what it seems. A space dedicated to the production of the falsehood. And the model is the three-level one-by-one structure whose course is a green screen room with a bed, a small bed, children bed, and the green screen technique in like a fossil media for the environment is so this media relies on a complex infrastructure supply system on the top, and the room becomes a terminal of such a how to say machine supply system. So which is concealed within the facade, which derived from the Stanley Kubrick's film, The Shining. Actually, it's come from The Shining's hotel. It's the overlooked hotel's facade. And so Victor Hugo usually said the book will kill the edifice. But today, this scenario has been realized by some radical changes in electronic technology, which screens take over the tasks previously carried by the physical space, and give the legitimacy to the existence of architecture as a modern discipline. And so this scenographic way of living supported by the system, we think is irresistible. And so this installation or this model is a questioning of the authenticity. So here are some pictures of it at the exhibition. So the baby's bed. And the next, this project comes from the Shanghai OACT exhibition in 2020. And the curator at that time asked me to do an installation to recall a spatial experience in their childhood, which is important to them, and translate that kind of a memory into installation. So I was right next to my father's. My father at that time was in the severe illness, which in the hospital. So I was there when I get the call and when I received the design assignment. So my father was in the stage of a severe cancer. So when I received the call from the curator, so I thought this is a small. So I recall there is a small house. There is a small house with a courtyard, which he and I lived together from 1994 to 1995. in Peking University. So here is the photo I took with my father in the courtyard in 1994. And this is the only photo I can find with my father by far. So the house is still there, and now it serves as like a security office of Yan Dongyuan of Peking University, and also this is how it looks during my revisit for this project in 2021. So my father used to product, how to say, it's a kind of sculpture or resign. I don't know how to say that. Inside, using this house to product something like that. It's in the picture. So there were like small items like ornament or the speakers, like refrigerator speakers made by a mixture of gel and the powder. Pretty like plastics or like there was a lot of process of like breathing, polishing, and so on, so that you can using the powder and the kind of 树脂 to make the final product like that. And here's the plan I drew after the revisit. So you can see the whole plan. There is a bed actually is for me because here is near with my elementary school at that time. So actually this is not a home, this is a temporary home. So behind the ship, my father put a bed for me, and so this is a very different with other people's experience. In fact, it is not a residence, and you can notice that there is a ship next to the desk. So this is my father's desk, his office. It's more like today's a small architecture office. This is the office. There is like the other workers' room for the production, and behind the ship is my bed. So let me see. So I remember profoundly that every morning I got up and looked out from the bed through the ship. So the original idea is like the two worlds divided by the ship. One from the children's perspective and the other from the father's perspective. The special concept is the children looking out from his bed, while the father looking in from his desk. So it is like that, like the prototype of the whole installation. Then we want to bring the black lighting and we want to project the audience into the theater space inside to give them a sense of immersion. So here is a glass. So we want to bring the audience in. So it have to be a mirrored spaces, like like this. So we build a model based on the spatial prototype, and here's the first version of the rendering. And this room is like a room of plaster, which is the texture of the production produced at that time. So this is a children's room, this is a father's room. And after this, we want to project the offset audience into the reef of the offset audience by means of optical reflection. So I was inspired by some like the Pepper's Ghost theater device. So in that time, about it's maybe about 19th centuries. So here is the schematic of this case. So to create the image, there need a strong light source above and an ambient light source alongside. So the image producing device that becomes electronic. So we shoot the black reflection of the audience through a camera and project it onto the monitor. And then we use an angle glasses to once again, and then we use angled glasses to once again flip the projection so that the two images actually at the stage actually to face here and the black to black here. And we made an optical model to test the idea. Here's the image generated by the model here, and providing that is feasible. So we're using the two, actually we're using two cell phones to simulate the viewers and further developed the film work and the foundations. It is kind of the foundations of this project. So this is a final rendering of this project. And this is the view of the bottom of the model of the entire installation. We hide a lot of things at the bottom, including the mechanics and the image system and sensing system, and it also can produce fog. And so we put a machine to produce fog and so on. So it takes a totally 13 teams from different disciplines, and it makes 2 years to complete this work. So here is animation to explain how the installation works. And so when the visitors stating on both sides, the sensors underneath will trigger the device to enclose a black room on one end and a viewing room in the other. And the lights above will active to deliver image. And the camera catch the reflection of the visitors back and projected them onto the monitor. And the projections are then flipped by an angle glass at 45 degrees. So as a result, it looks like a two ghosts of the images facing each other, black and black to black, back to back. And the entire operation will trigger the smoke device to a small device which hidden below. So it's emitting a layer of smoke into the space. So there is a rocking well by the bed and the table. And so the image is not there at the whole time. It will appear for seconds and last for a while and then disappear. So it's require the audience to keep chasing for it. So 1994 is essentially a visual machine with like a two-person theater. So there are some pictures showing how it's being built. This is a pew built in Shanghai, where we did a pre-build to test whether the machine can viable. And here how we decorate inside and text the sensor and the screen. This is how I teach the worker to do the. Actually this is what my father did at that time, and we enlarge it and make it copies, and then smash it or destroy it and put it on the ship. And here are some photos of the finished installation. This is how it looked in Shenzhen, Pingshan Museum. Let me check. There is a small documentary. I think it's here. Yeah, have a look. A documentary of a trailer of the documentary. Okay. Okay, next. Do I have time? This project is for let me see, for an art group, which is a 政治纯形式办公室, is a polit share form office at Shenzhen. Also is in Pingshan Art Museum. So the exhibition is basing on their works of the art group, and we create the spatial design. So the works of this team, this art group, are diverse and focus on the how to say collective list. Collective list? I don't know. And from devote the political content with this kind of form. It's like a purely blue. They usually using like that. It is like a basic their tone of their art create, and their works constantly reading the relationship between the individual and the collective. And so our spatial design is for the project is basing on the interpretation of the portrait of this one, Mr. Polite, and this is actually is their work, their one of their work. This is a fish. This is a digital composite of the facial features of the 5 team members of the art group. So this is not existed. This is not a real man picture. This is a digital like a composite. And so our proposal was a response by the collective 5 typical collective list space, like a water room here. So we also make like 5 different so by the 5 typical collective space, water room, and like a screening room, and a store, and bathhouse, which is a typical in 1980s China, and to create a corridor typical of the apartment housing, like Tongzilou, which is the blue corridor, ties together with the space to meet the different needs of the multiple media works by PSFO. So this is the first scheme. We use the agenda position and scaling to create a space with layers of the walls, and so multiple layers of the walls stack to form a thick walled exhibition space, and can be remote around and the enlarged. So enlarge the staircase become the open space for the viewing a movie is there. But this this proposal was not accepted by the museum. Then we continue working on the second one. So it's like that. It's a blue corridor which how to say, so actually we're using the spatial elements for the extracted in abstract and juxtaposed with one another, create episodes and the connection between the different buildings and objects, forming a new species. We call it forming a new species. So the paralleled mirrored at the end of the corridor is here and here, and which give the illusion of the infinitive extension with the limited spaces. So this is some final pictures of after building. So you can see we here we make the same size with the 6 oil painting. With the same size, we cut the window here. So this is how we made our painting related to artist painting. So this is the corridor. And the final one, the last case is the 4 sound installation we designed for the 751 Xiuyao campus. And this is our collaboration with the musician Zhang Yadong. So this park was original energy company. So there is many industrial sites left in the factory. And so we choose 4 locations in the park to interpret the relationship between the sound and the still relics in 4 different ways. So the first 2 installations are attached to an existing, we call cracking furnace, 裂解炉. And this is the first one we call sound cloud. Sound cloud is a temporary installation built above the furnace and intrinsic by stress. And some of the seemingly randomly and wrapped seemingly random actually is the structural supports, while others using the principle of microphones to transmit sounds. So the cluster of the stress disrupt the correspondence between microphones and earpiece, and the people are lost in the field of sounds, unable to figure out where the voice coming from and where they go. So the unexpected encounters and connections are able to take place. So this is a temporary roof design for the Beijing International Design Week. So we need to realize that we need to realize an interesting space for sound experience within a limited budget. So what you can see, so at this place, and what you're saying will be heard by some stranger, and you didn't know where the stranger is. And next we extend a tank next to the already abandoned cracking furnace to form like a second installation. People can access the inside of the tank through a sliding door. And Zhang Yadong's musical installation is connected to the tank, and one can hear it from inside. It's kind of similar to hear the sound of the original architectural remains. And so we want to regenerate the old part with the new part. So this is how it looks like. And at the top of the space, there are rotating roof, and it's rotate every 12 hours. It's actually a time measuring instrument who gave the interior space a sense of a ritual. And when the roof rotated for a circle, and the friction between the metals cause it to vibrate like a religion's instrument sound. So becoming like a symbol of the sound of the time. And the third one is for the third installation we create is a sound and visually multiple focal point with a cylinder-like shape. Is on the corner of this square, and so the interior can be used as a small stage or a place for looking out over the city landscape, and it has a different thickness of the interior steel plate, so people can struck the steel plate with different sound pitches. This is how it looks inside. And a small video of that. And the last installation is the largest in volume, and is original glass store tank. So we reconstructed we reconstructed its roof and add some balance bar to his original structure. So we design a openable roof which can emit smoke to the outside. It's like that. So the ejected glass will disrupt the airflow to unbalance the balance bar. So the end of the balance bar is a metal sheath. It's similar to the principle of the bell. So when the balance bar is out of balance, the bell will sound. So this project is still in the conceptual stage. So we will continue to develop it. And it's, yeah, this is all I want to share today. And thank you. Okay, let me stop the share.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it's really interesting to see how your works blur the boundary between architecture and film, theater. I would say also with stage design, you see a lot of features like the stage design in your works, and to produce like I say cultural propositions or personal memories. And we also see a lot of interesting dialogues between the 2D and the 3D in terms of materiality and form, but also what's real, what's surreal. I think we can have more deeper discussions later in the roundtable session. Yeah, thank you again. Now let's move to our second speaker, David Askanati. David, please.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be here. I'm here in Los Angeles, in the United States. So it's the evening, but not as late as I think for some other people. But it's nice to be here. And thanks for inviting me, Chao. Chao and I went to graduate school together. Chao was like the best student in my class, better than everybody else by far, like always an amazing work. And his thesis, I remember, was one of like the most important theses that year, I think. And so it's so nice to connect again. Thank you for having me. I know this is ostensibly about technology, and I'm not always very good at it. So hold on, I always forget how to like share my screen. Sorry, hold on. Full screen mode, and then I have to do one of these. Okay, so I'm gonna here. Okay, sorry, I'm very confused. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
I think you're seeing a little bit of my desktop. Sorry about that. We'll just pretend that that's not there. So I'm gonna just talk about what I'm calling three comparative models. My practice is called Desk. It's based here in Los Angeles. A few things, I don't explicitly work with things that have to do with necessarily virtuality or the metaverse. I feel like maybe today's conversation is going to be like 4 different metaverses, or universes, and today's whole thing will be a metaverse. I don't know. But one thing that I've been thinking about is when I want to talk about it, maybe the way that models, both in the very typical sense of an architecture model, to the most kind of broader sense of what a model might mean, like modeling or a fashion model, or other ways that one, let's say, or something sort of stands in place for something else, or somehow shows the way that something else works. That these things are somehow kind of in the world today, of course, of the digital. A lot of my work maybe looks at the world of aesthetics, of digitality, and sees a lot of things that are like high polish, high finish, glossy, things like this. And my work is sort of against, let's say aesthetically, against all of that. It's very much provisional. It's not complete. It's maybe temporary. It's rough. It's made of materials that are super cheap. They're not very beautiful necessarily. It's just like whatever's accessible. Mostly because maybe there's other kind of aesthetic narratives for digital worlds other than, I think, the high finish, high polish version that I think we're often familiar with. So the 3 projects I'll show you, these are 2 snippets from the 3 of them. On the left here, can you see my mouse? I assume you can. Yes. Okay. This is a sort of a proposal for an architecture that's not clear. So it's basically a proposal to make a model, but the architecture that result from that model is a little bit vague. This middle project, which I think actually we'll see last, I guess these are a little bit out of order, sorry. This middle project is a proposal which is itself a model, but is also a kind of proposal for an architecture. And then on the right, which will be the middle project, the second project I'll show you, is a model that came after the architecture. So the architecture sort of happened first, and then a kind of model happened, and then another model of the model, I guess, happened after that for some reason. So I'll start with this first project. I think it's, here we go. Oh yeah, okay. Which is that image of the person with this thing. A bunch of my work started from looking at paper, mostly because, again, of this kind of aesthetic curiosity or position that my practice has had, but also because I've been interested in the idea that as we've moved as culture into a digital world over the last 50 years, we have moved from things that are maybe in the world of material things into the kind of virtual. And to me, paper has sort of been that thing that has changed its meaning culturally as we've moved digitally. So it's a material that used to maybe have ink printed on it, drawings, text from newspapers, things like this. It's a paper that we used to look at. It's a material we used to look at for information. That has now been taken over by screens. Screens are where we look for information. But instead, in the meantime, paper has actually had a huge renaissance as part of the shipping industry, you know, for shipping products around the world, for packaging, things like this. And so it's moved from a material which is almost like a window, something that we would look through, to text, to drawings, and instead has kind of lost its meaning, just like architecture at times has lost its meaning from something where you're supposed to learn something to something which is just a thing. And now paper is kind of in this world of just being a sort of thing with physical properties. It can be strong, it can be weak, it can be flexible, it can be cheap, whatever it is. And so what we're looking at in this slide here are a bunch of different experiments. I won't go through them all, but basically different little projects I've been doing over the last, I don't know, 7 years or something. Basically taking pieces of paper that are really small, like this small sometimes, and pieces of paper that are really big, sometimes the size of buildings, and starting to think about the fact that they operate very differently depending on their size. So a piece of paper that's very tiny has a certain stiffness and rigidity that's very different than a paper that's really large, that's going to, you know, basically collapse. This is probably very obvious, but what we can see in these images, where did my mouse go? I had a mouse. Do you see a mouse? I don't see a mouse. Okay. No more mouse, I guess. I don't know where it is. I don't know where, I don't see it either, but it's okay. Where I'll just kind of zoom in here. Maybe what we see, let's say in these images, are kind of these ideas of, if we were to take, let's say, the real world as a starting point rather than the digital world, and we took a piece of paper and just let it kind of flop at one size, and then we had to make a model of that piece of paper. That's kind of what we're looking at on this image on the right-hand side here. On the left is like a piece of paper that just was really small and curly, and on the right is a larger scale model of it. And then on the left-hand image, we start to see digital models of these things. So this is almost like the classic version of how things have always happened in architecture. A kind of physical thing happens, people draw it, people draw nature and make models of it, they make drawings of it, etc. And this is sort of in that same kind of planet. As I was sort of starting on this, it was sort of to say, let's remember that pieces of paper have specific physical qualities at certain sizes. A piece of paper, when it's this small, has one sort of physics. When it's really big, has a different kind of physics. And let's go in the digital world and like kind of screw those up. So if I make a model of it that's this big, digitally, I can blow that thing up and sort of change its kind of physical reality. And that's what the rest of these experiments are kind of doing. Again, I won't go in too much into this, but these were sort of collections of proposals where we would have pieces of paper that were acting like themselves, like they're size specific. Oh, it's really small, so it curls. Oh, it's really big, so it like collapses. And then combined with pieces of paper that came from the digital world. So the digital world where those physical realities of material are interchanged. And then those two, the both real version and the kind of virtual version, are sort of spliced together. And that's what you see in this like this image with this like blue background, for example, is a kind of different versions of these things coming together. Some of them need extra structure to be held up. Some of them don't, because they are just what the paper would have done anyway at that size. Anyway, so this is sort of like a collection of a bunch of things. I think there's about too much. That led to this project, which this project started from this image that we made in the office, which was to look at this form of what we call a scroll, which I don't have an image, but basically a scroll is something that we see in many, many cultures around the world, and historic ways of producing books. Before the sort of invention of like the book with pages, we get the scroll that you can kind of have like a really, really long, infinite amount of text, a lot like scrolling through, you know, social media or something on your phone. And so we thought, let's make a almost like a metaphor. Let's make a model, a form of a scroll. And then let's build it at two sizes. So this is a kind of image before we built it at two sizes, where we would say, could we make a form of architecture, or at least a model for an architecture, where it's ambiguous which size it is. Is this a form that belongs to the figure, the human figure on the left image of the image, or is this an architecture that belongs to the figure on the right? Is it for those arms, or is it for the person? Oh, so this is my moment where I'm going to shift gears to two videos that I'll play on my screen. I'm, again, bad at slides and figuring out how to have videos on my slides, sorry. So I'm going to just, hopefully you can hear this, and if it's too loud, let me know. We became interested in the idea that we could start to make comparative videos of paper that operates at one size physically, paper that operates at another size physically, and then what their digital equivalents might be. So their simulated equivalents. So these two videos are kind of proposal for, could we make an architecture that's all four of these mediums put together? The big physical model, the small physical model, the simulation of a big physical model, and the simulation of a small physical model. Could they all get combined and make one architectural proposal, like somehow? That was the idea. Okay, this goes on for a while. It's a little bit silly. Also, by the way, I love that any simulation software with hands is like my favorite software. So I thought, you know, in the world we've got hands, in a computer maybe there's hands. Let's put these things together, right? Seems kind of obvious to me. Okay, I'm going to stop these. We'll have to keep watching. But okay, so that's what that was. Full screen. Okay. So that was sort of how we began this project. Was could we make an architecture which is of all four, two scales, two sizes, and let's say two realities, a digitally simulated reality and a physical reality at the same time. And so this is sort of more work as we were sort of working on this project. On the left, we made, these are the photographs of the two models from those videos. The large model, which I think is 3 feet, so about 1 meter tall, and then a small one, which I think was 9 inches, which is, I don't know what that is in centimeters, but not too many. We also built a kind of structural model of these things, and you'll see the structural model. It was just made of paper, and it was basically these like, steel flange cross sections. And the photograph on the left is blurry because it only existed, it took us about a month to build that model, and it collapsed in about half a second. So it's like, I only got one photo before it completely collapsed and we lost it. But it's built out of all paper and then tape. So it took you'll see here, there's like 1 million pieces of tape like holding this thing together. It was very difficult to build, actually. But again, we did these at 2 sizes, and then we sort of did the same thing digitally, where we worked at 2 different sizes in simulation softwares. What I love about the digital world is we think, again, that anything is possible, but actually, most, if not all, 3D modeling digital environments do have a sort of size limitation. Either they have like a file size limitation, data size limitation. What we got interested in was a simulation software that was optimized for fashion, for clothing. And so it didn't really do simulations of materials very good once you got to like the building scale. And I would imagine at the scale of like a planet, it would be really terrible. And so we kind of did that here. So oh, my mouse is back. Look at this. I think, actually, I'm not entirely sure. I think this was stuff we were simulated really small. And this is, no, wait, sorry. These two were, actually, I don't remember, but 2 of these are from a very, very tiny, like almost the size of a fingernail in the computer simulation. So not a lot of action on these materials. And another one was at the scale of a building. And we started to see things kind of operate very differently. We also started to give sort of encode various scale figures in here of architecture. So things that look like windows, but to suggest that maybe this window and this version would be the same size as this one. So that would mean that this model, because the window's so big, if these are supposed to be the same size, then this is obviously a much smaller model that we're like zoomed into compared to this one where we're zoomed out, and that same size window now appears much smaller. And then we made 2 different models from this that would sort of take all of these things together, the sort of simulated world, the physical kind of experiments that we were doing, and then the two sizes. So on the left here, these models were built the same size. They're both 9 inches tall, so they're like this big. This model on the left is a model for a large, I think a 7-story building or something like this. Its exterior form comes from the digital world, comes from some sort of digital simulation. On the inside, I'll show you in a second, its interior form comes from this physical model where paper is kind of just hanging out. The model on the left, on my right, this one is a 9-inch tall model as well, but it's for a proposal only for a 9-foot tall building. So something that's like the size of a room. In this model, you'll see there's some structure and stuff on the inside that comes from a digital simulation. And on the exterior, the model is simply wrapped with a piece of paper. The reason that we have paper just kind of on a model, and then stuff that's from a digital simulation that's 3D printed, et cetera, is to make a physical model where we wouldn't quite know exactly what the building would look like. We would assume in the case of the stuff that's digitally simulated, obviously that could be scaled up and it would look exactly like that. The paper here, when we just put a piece of paper like that, it's kind of left ambiguous. Would the building be wrapped by a piece of paper, and therefore if it were, it wouldn't look like this, the paper would behave differently? Or would there be some other kind of translation system to sort of, decide this is the exact form and this is how it should be? And honestly, every time we put the paper on there, it looks different. So there's parts of the model that are very clear and parts of the model that they're kind of ambiguous about its translation moving forward. And then these are just, if you take off the exterior part of the scroll, this would be the interior part of the proposal for these buildings. On the left, you'll see that was the model that had the paper on the exterior. On its interior is all the stuff that was digitally simulated. The photograph on the right is the other model that was the 3D printed digital simulation on the exterior, which is now left with paper. And so the proposal for these was, again, to make, let's say, an architecture based on the loss of the book. So we went really far back to the scroll, which seemed actually quite contemporary, since that's kind of how we experience text and images now. And to suggest that we could maybe look back to architecture to not exactly know what the forms of architecture should look like, but maybe their models can be in the space of ambiguity and projection. The second project I'll show you now, and I'll try to move a little bit quicker, is based on a house that I've been building for forever. It's very slow. In Mexico, I have a few other houses getting built. This one is like the slowest, but it's happening. It's in this beautiful part of Mexico, right off the ocean, right on the beach. It's really great. I won't go too much into what the house is. This is the only slide we'll see of this house, but basically in the plan here, you can see basically there's actually two houses. There's one house that's right here. This is the roof plan. And then the other house is right here. It's basically a kind of main house and a guest house for a family that partially lives in Mexico, partially lives in the United States, and would be a place for the whole family to come together at times, and sometimes only for some people to kind of live there. So sort of like a villa. What we were doing was kind of, again, going back to the idea of how do we understand the size of things in a digital environment. So we made both of these masses for the two houses are very similar. They're both this kind of step figure. This is also the part of Mexico that has all these beautiful Mayan ruins, all these temples that are these kind of stepped pyramids. We see stepped pyramids in different forms. We see ziggurats, we see other things all over the world in different cultures. We see them in Africa and the Middle East and India. The ones in this area of Mexico basically have two staircases. They have the stepping of the mass, and then they have an actual staircase that kind of intersects it. And so we were interested in producing a house that was kind of doing the same thing, a kind of intersection of a stair and a stepping mass. But the reason that we did 2 of them was to produce these images that are right here, which was basically a way to say the reality of these buildings is that they're 2 different sizes, but if we can make them look exactly the same, there's certain things that would scale between them and certain things that wouldn't. The windows, for example, can get smaller and bigger from one to the other. But the door, we decided the door, like all doors in architecture, are related to human bodies, and human bodies don't change in size. They're not digital in that sense. They're quite stuck. And so we were kind of interested in the idea that the door would actually be the same size in both of these. So this is the actual difference in size between the buildings. And everything else would scale. And then we started making images like this, where we were saying, well, if we were looking at it from the point of view of form, where the form is equal, what we start to see is the door appears differently and the size of people would appear differently. If they sort of inhabit an equal world, the rest of the world would look quite different around them. And then these are the 2 models for the 2 houses. This is the bigger, oh, I was zoomed out way too much, sorry. I hope I'm not making anybody nauseous. This is like the bigger house. This is the smaller house that you can see here. Anyway, we were asked to do an installation around the same time we were starting this project. And we were thinking a little bit along the same lines of the 2 scroll models that I showed you, which was to say that I thought we should make, we should show the house, but the budget for this installation was very small. And so it was enough, the budget was enough to buy a very large roll of paper. And so I thought, why don't we just make a model of the house out of paper and kind of just present it. And so we called it the Slump model. So this was a model that happened after the architecture. The project, the house was already under construction. It's nice and upright. This was a kind of proposal to sort of bring it into this gallery, build a model that maybe wasn't a very good model, not the way you would necessarily want to present your projects, but a moment to say, again, what happens when gravity acts on models, which we tend to not want gravity to act on models, let's say. And so we get something that looks like this. We see the door there that's a little bit collapsed. We see these windows. And we built this to fit into this gallery. It was half scale. So this is a 1:2 model. So it's half the size of the actual house. You can kind of see it there. There's a reference on the upper left to the sculpture that I really love by Robert Gober. I won't talk about it too much. I don't want to take too much time, but it's this beautiful, it's like a sculpture that's both half seems male, it seems female. It looks like a paper bag. It also looks like a body. It's the scale that's 1:1 to a person, but it's also out of scale to a paper bag. It's like a lot of things all at the same time. And we thought, you know, art architecture is that. So in this drawing here, you can kind of see in the background is like the actual geometry, and then kind of rendered here is a 3D scan of the installation kind of as is. We built it, oh yeah, so here. So we built this thing actually as one model, even though the house is 2 different houses. So we just took the 2 elevations, which are different sizes, and connected them to make a single form, which is a lot like this Robert Smithson sculpture that's called Pointless Vanishing Point, which was about the sort of taking the space of perspective and just making a form out of it. And so that's what this is. So we started making this model both. First, we made one that was 12 inches tall. It's like this big. It kind of stood up, and then we made like a bigger one that's almost maybe roughly 1 meter tall. It started to fall down, and then we made the one in the gallery, which was the size of the gallery, and obviously it totally collapsed. So this was a kind of model. So the gallery is this kind of wedge shape in plan. So by taking the 2 sizes of the 2 houses and scaling down, that kind of actually fit in plan perfectly. And then these are the 2 photos looking in both directions, one that looks towards the bigger scale and one towards the smaller scale from the interior. And then we built this another model. So we have the house in Mexico, then we had this post model that we put in the gallery. And then after that, we kind of surveyed this installation by scanning it. And then we made another model for ourselves to kind of document it. So we were calling this the Slump model. It's like a model of a model. And you'll see it's kind of broken in pieces because, again, we had a very tiny non-budget budget. So we had not very great equipment to 3D scan this thing. And we were in this gallery. You can see it's very tight to the sides. So you couldn't really get a good 3D scan. And also the paper was like very complex. Like, so we had to 3D scan it in pieces, basically. So that's what these things were. And I'll show you a video of this model because the thing that became, oh, look at that, very slow. The thing that kind of became interesting to us about it as we were building it was that in person, the Slump model was flexible. You could go to the paper and move it around. And then of course, once we 3D scanned it, 3D printed it again, and put it on these like weird little pieces of metal to kind of hold it up, it changed its physics. It went from flexible to rigid. And so we thought it was kind of funny. So we made this little video of it, of people touching it. I'm really into hands that touch models or hands that touch architecture. I think it's great. So sometimes it jiggles and sometimes it doesn't jiggle. That's the conclusion to the video. It's just, does it jiggle? Does it not jiggle? It's kind of pointless, I guess. Yeah, jiggle. No jiggle. Yeah. Okay. All right. Back to my slides here. Okay. Full screen. Okay. So that's this thing. Does it come back? Okay. All right, the last thing I'll show you is a proposal that we're kind of still maybe working on to make real. This was something that we started 2 years ago when the pandemic was really bad in the United States, and I was stuck at home. And one thing that I have some friends that are kind of part of the queer community in Los Angeles, and we've been talking about kind of what are queer spaces that are non-digital, but when there's a pandemic, other than just apps and stuff. And one thing that we got interested in with some friends in different nonprofits here in LA was the bathhouse, which is not really something that exists that much in LA. What exists are spas. They're a little bit different in the context of America, and I'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, I was stuck at home and I thought, let's make a proposal for an architecture where like people are naked together and they breathe and share water in the same air, which is the opposite of what you should do during a pandemic. So that was kind of where this started. And so this is an elevation for this project. And you'll see, if you haven't picked up on it yet, all of these projects kind of share a theme, which is that there's always two things, and they're always somehow about different sizes or different materialities. And this is where this idea of that I started with comparative models comes in, that a lot of my work is really about comparing two things. As this sort of method, it's almost like a pedagogical method to sort of say architecture or the work that I do should be sometimes about learning something or about making some sort of conclusion between two differing poles of reality or something. So in this project, you'll see, the building is basically two things, and one is a scaled up version of the other. Like the scrolls, it sort of inverts, like the building on the right, the structures on the outside, the building on the left, the structures on the inside. There's various reversals like that I'll show you in a second. I'm not going to go through all these millions of references, but more to sort of say, like, at least when I talk about this project, especially in the context of the United States, I think it's the United States just doesn't have like a lot of history with like public shared bath houses. Bathrooms are very private here. But there was a kind of history that maybe 100 years ago, 120 years ago, especially in New York, Chicago, Boston, there were more public bathhouses. Today, especially in Los Angeles, there's a lot of spas, and spas are not exactly the same. They're not public to everybody. You usually have to pay to go. They're less about needing to wash yourself and more about comfort and relaxation, let's say. So there's a sort of shift in the language. In LA, at least, there's lots of spas. So it's not just for the rich. Actually, there's so many spas that are just for everybody. So it's similar in some ways. Anyway, one thing that we were kind of interested in is we were sort of doing a little very narrow to United States and a little bit of France as we were sort of thinking about this, because we didn't want to do the history of spas everywhere, but as we were trying to think through it was basically the idea of the toilet as a conceptual project and as a very physical, real thing. So we both at the same time as Duchamp's famous art object, which is like the most maybe important conceptual piece of art in Western art, at least, at the exact same time as the introduction in Paris of these things that were pissotoires, which were like the first public restrooms. So these were urinals, they were only for men. There wasn't anything for women. But it's, I think, important to me that like at the same time that Duchamp turns this thing, which was very public, turns it into a toilet, it was actually also the same moment that these plumbing became social, let's say. It became like for the public, or the invention of a kind of public space. And so anyway, we looked through different things. We're looking at the idea of plumbing as, in Pochet, inside of the walls, plumbing is something which is seen. We're interested in the plans of these things. We're always divided by gender and by class. In the United States, these are some of these kinds of old bathhouses that existed. They were always sort of intersected the sort of politics of whatever politics that were out there really became prevalent in these spaces. So a lot of racism, certain races of people were not allowed in these bathhouses back in the day. Obviously, they were gendered. Not everybody was allowed, like people viewing each other. There's a lot of control and things like this. But of course, we see bathhouses not just as a place for control and social control, but also as places of pleasure. So we see narratives around sexuality, around relaxation. We see narratives in architecture. I'm thinking of, in this case, Rem Koolhaas and Madeline Wiesendorp's drawings from Delirious New York. Of like the locker room. We see these also as places that, during the Holocaust in Europe, were places of death. And so they're both kind of spaces of bodies together, collecting in architecture without clothing with water, seems to sort of be a place of like distinct conflict and relaxation, like all the human emotions that and problems that exist are sort of there. While I was working on this project, actually, I was getting this text message from the government here in LA because the police were outside of a spa because there was a protest about gender issues here in Los Angeles at this spa not too far away. And it reminded me that as I was working on this thing, this is a sort of, the bathhouse is still today, at least in the United States, kind of this thing where architecture intersects bodies and politics all at once. Sorry, you guys should see this. This is amazing. This doesn't exist anymore, this Hollywood spa. This was like 3 blocks from where I live now. But I just love this drawing where so much of Los Angeles, if anybody has been here, I'm sure it's like this in other places, but so much of LA is like these kind of generic buildings. And then you go inside the building and there's another very unexpected world inside. This is this amazing drawing of the spa, and this is a gay spa, so lots of men having inappropriate relationships with each other. But this idea that you can take the architecture off, the outside off, and inside there's another planet, I think was super important. And then of course we were kind of interested in the figure of the grid as the organizational factor for bathrooms and for social kind of relationships with one another. So we're looking at separate prices for Fun Palace, Hiromi, Fuji, this Japanese architect's bathroom proposals. And then again, Rem Koolhaas had this kind of stepped, very much like the house we were doing, this sort of step thing for a bathhouse in his thesis. So this is back to that sort of elevation diagram, the sort of 2 comparative forms. We're thinking of the building on the left of that diagram, we're calling it exhale and flex, and the building on the right as inhale and sag. So the project title was called Inhale, Exhale, Sag, Flex. Inhaling and exhaling, sagging and flexing, we think of as things that people do. So we thought maybe, what if architecture did it as well? What if architecture could be a little bit alive? So the building on the left were more of contained rooms, things that are sort of pushing out, things that are inhaling. And the building on the right is more of on the inside an interior landscape where the building is kind of drooping. The world is sort of pressing down on it. This is a section through it. So what we see in the section is, this is on the 2nd floor, the kind of large pool for everybody. On the ground floor below it is a kind of, we're calling it interior landscape. It's like showers and locker rooms, in various pools and hot tubs and things. The building on the right is on the ground floor, bathrooms and showers, and then on the top floor is like a sauna. The other thing you'll see is water is sort of all over the place. So if this is the building where things are kind of expanding, it's a lot of hot air. So the exterior is flexible and also being expanded. In the center here, you'll see this is a kind of hot water container. So all the hot water of the building would be stored here. And then on top of it is the sauna. And then up here, it's Los Angeles. It's pretty temperate climate. So there's not a lot of, it's all very interior, exterior. There's no, here's where the outside world begins and the inside begins. But this would be a sort of collection pool for all the cold water in the building. And then you can kind of see some pipes and things like this. So this is the ground floor plan. Again, this is like that sort of interior landscape of bathrooms or no, sorry, showers, locker room spaces, pools, etc. There's no structured walls. Everything is kind of curtains that would get locked and tied together. Here are sort of bathrooms and things like this in the other building, and then a kind of threshold between them. And then on the second floor would be that large open pool. And then, oh yeah, and then these are like stairs, and I think there's a stair there. And then this is that like sauna that where you just sit on top of this like hot water bladder that I imagine would be very, very comfortable. And then some kind of plunges with it. And so, yeah. And so this is that large pool. We were imagining it almost like a beach, like an interior beach or something. That would be made, the building would be made of paper, hopefully. We were thinking building paper like Tyvek, the stuff that you put inside of buildings usually to keep water out. We thought, let's use that because we really want a lot of water. And so this thing would just be covered in a lot of this paper, I guess. This is the section through that thing. And then this is the other buildings cross section. Again, there's that hot water bladder, and then on top of it, the sauna. And then in this building, this isn't paper. This would be these water bladders that I'll show you a picture of in a second. They're basically these big rubber things that contain water, and they would just drape over the building. But of course, this is the building that's kind of exhaling. So there's all this steam and stuff. So maybe, you know, the water pressure and the hot air pressure would kind of push things out a little bit. So these are some of the details of these things. On the left, this is the left-hand building, what a window would look like. It would be a kind of rigid panel of material against something quite flexible around it. The other building that's made of the building paper would be a PVC flexible material. So again, there's like the idea of similar things formally that then have some sort of reversal around them. So the size of the windows change, their rigidity changes from rigid to flexible, etc. And then these are kind of like very preliminary wall section details. So I thought I really want to design a gutter. So this is our gutter because it doesn't really rain that much in Los Angeles, but I thought I'd really like to do a gutter. So there it is. And then in the other building, all that Tyvek would be on a roll of paper that you would sort of have at the top of the building. And then you would just pull it down when you needed to replace it or something. The idea of the whole building was that it would be a proposal for a temporary bathhouse. So there's different sites in Los Angeles that the city owns that are kind of unused, like empty parking lots, especially in neighborhoods that are kind of underserved by various types of public infrastructure. So the idea was that this whole thing would be demountable. So all of the structure here, for example, it's all flat pack that you just fold up into these kind of triangular cross sections. It could come apart. The paper, you just replace it once it doesn't work anymore. So I thought, if you're gonna do a bathhouse with like the budget of that installation I had to do, maybe you could do this. I don't know. These are some other drawings. These are basically the diagram of the physics. The physics in this one is a sort of simulation of a downward pressure, and this one is a simulation of an upward pressure. The structure, kind of the paper. This is a bunch of layers that maybe you rip off a layer of paper once it's dirty. I don't know. Maybe here's like the kind of water bladders. Oh yeah, so wait, here are these water bladders. So these are amazing, actually. These are basically mostly used by militaries around the world to temporarily store water. I think they're beautiful, and I thought maybe we should use them for some architecture. So they're not just inflatable, but they're actually store water. So I thought those could be, those could be walls or something. And then, yeah, like the plumbing, and then I don't know what this is, some more stuff. And so the other thing with this project is, I don't know, in terms of the digital world, the thing that was important to me is, or at least the importance of the project was the idea that we could think of as architecture as being a little bit like a body, maybe architecture that needs to be maintained constantly, in the same way that if you go to a bathhouse, it's about maintaining your body, it's about taking care of yourself, that we would maybe have that kind of relationship to buildings. And so we made these kinds of images. We didn't put any people in them, mostly to start to imagine that the subject of these things would be the architecture, that maybe we could have feelings for the architecture. Maybe we could sort of look at it as something that like we would want to go and maintain and touch and caress in the same way that we would want to maintain and touch and caress ourselves, maybe. So that was maybe a silly idea, but kind of the idea. So that's it. I hope that was somewhat relevant to, that's not stuff, to what we're talking about tonight.
Oh, thank you, David. It's a very inspiring presentation. I always, I think maybe the key word here is scale, and the scale is kind of the identifies difference between virtual and physical. Because in the physical world, you have to deal with material properties. Then I see you utilize the concept of scale to represent architecture. But usually architecture in its relationship to scale was expressed through architectural elements like doors, like windows, but right. You also kind of bring the material property, the material behaviors into the stage to express things. I think that's amazing. Yeah, I think we can, yeah.
Yeah, I always think with the digital world, I'm always like, buildings, people still like flat floors, doors, we still want the door handle at the right height. Like I want my toilet to still be at the right size when I sit on it. So like, I don't know, there's something about size that I think is super interesting, that we can have a world where there is no size, but also size still, people haven't changed. We haven't become giants yet. I'm waiting one day.
And when we talk about size, talk about scale, is always relatively. So yeah. That's where the comparative comes. Yes, thank you, David. Well, we can have further discussion later. And now let's invite the third speaker, Wang Liang. Wang Liang, please.
All right, thank you, Charles, for inviting me and having me on this platform. So I'm just gonna share my screen now quickly. I have been following you guys before I start. I've been following you guys, what you guys been doing, especially after the pandemic, the platform, Digital Futures. I think what you guys have been doing is great. It's really kind of generating and distributing the knowledge across within and beyond the community of architecture. I think that's really good. But I got to see, this is not my typical Saturday evening program. I'm based in Cambridge now, but catching up with old friend Chan, I went to college together. It's great to see you after a while now, and also meeting up new friends and seeing the fascinating works is really, I mean, totally justified. The whole thing, it's actually quite exciting. So the plan is, for me, I was told to share my works for about 20 minutes. Basically, I think I'm going to follow the protocol established by David. I'm going to present 3 projects. That's kind of totally by coincidence. But for me, I think when I first started preparing for these 3 projects, I was thinking how I could, in a way, respond to the theme, which has to do with hybrid forms and virtual architecture. So the way I see my works is probably more sided with, let's say, on the urbanistic side, my kind of doctoral work here that I'm doing, and also my previous research and teaching kind of mostly deal with the larger idea of urban form. So I guess that's one way for me to kind of respond to the larger thematic subject here. And the other thing is, I think after I kind of prepared all those 3 projects together, I feel like maybe there's another way to contribute, which has to do with the form of knowledge production, which I think also could be shared with the previous presenters to go, and also David, the way that you kind of approach architecture, approach form and materiality, and etc., really kind of generate, I think, a broader discussion in terms of knowledge production. So what I'm going to do is, this is also, so personally for me, this is going to be a test for me to just run through some of the narratives I'm trying to construct for the project, and also research publication I've done. And also please do let me know what you guys think. It's the first time. So looking back, the kind of research design and also some of the teaching work I've done, I've tried to tease out maybe kind of the common threads, and I kind of landed with these 2 larger themes or threads, if you will, which has to do with the idea of superblock and the kind of the concept of commons. I'm just going to expand very quickly here. So the superblock becomes one of the kind of, if you will, gravities of my work for mainly 2 reasons. First, as designers, everybody knows superblock, or uses the term of superblock. But the scholarly and theoretical research on the subject has remained, to this day, surprisingly scarce, which is quite interesting to me when I first kind of discovered this. And second, as an urban kind of phenomenon, and if you will, an urban kind of operation that embodies a specific scale or a set of scales and practices of architecture, planning, and landscape, I think it still holds a great value in giving more agency in terms of practice and conceptualization of urban design today, which is something I do kind of focus a lot for my line of work. So for me, that agency is tied closely with 2, if you will, streams of knowledge. One is the kind of a topological approach to understanding the logic of singular architecture form, and also the relation in between a group of forms. In this case, the idea of collective form has been very important to me. And the other, the other stream of knowledge has to do with the idea of urban form, as I was mentioning earlier, one that is basically derived from close reading and examination of specific cultural and social and even political contexts. And practices as well. And the other kind of gravity of my line of work, which is, I would say, relatively new and still ongoing. These are, as you probably know, all of this, the kind of the great references that all kind of contributed to, for me, the idea of commons. For me, it really kind of resituates architecture and the city as both a site of kind of innovative and transformative innovation and intervention, also a mode of knowledge production for more kind of, let's say, what I call a common framework for political and spatial structure. So for me, the value of bringing this discourse, which the idea of commons normally would be categorized into the kind of political science line of thinking or scholarship. But I think for me, the value of bringing this stream of knowledge into architecture and design field is primarily 2-fold. First, I think it really enables us to kind of construct a spatial and political framework within which this is more of a kind of a general framework within which we can start to engage some of the very pressing and important issues, environmental and social justice issues. And secondly, I think it really allows us to, especially as designers, to speculate on more kind of imaginative and speculative relations between space and social structures. As you guys probably know, a lot of the recent works from some of the European designers, and also a lot of designers based in Asia and America have been dealing with the idea of community engagement and also kind of participatory design in a process of, rethinking alternative design process and forms outside of the so-called impatient capitalism in the contemporary urbanization. So I think there, of course, it's ongoing work, but I think that it does hold a lot of value to the design field. And the other question, actually, when you combine these two kind of interests, is why pairing these two research interests so important and so important for me in understanding, let's say, the discourse of architecture and urban design today. And I would say probably what my response to that would be, I think, again, that really for me allows the kind of potentiality to construct a common framework. And by that, I don't mean a certain pattern or certain shape. I think it's more of a structure that allows kind of more spontaneous development and mode of developments to be developed and more participation to be engaged. So in a way that I see my approach to, or it's just in general, my line of work is really kind of situated right in between architectural and urban design kind of realm. And it's about the effort to really create a common framework that, as I was mentioning earlier, that really embodies or instrumentalizes the kind of the structural logic of the built environment. And that actually brings out the two, I would say, important aspects or methodology in the process that I do research and also teaching and also design work is really this transscalar and transdisciplinary framework. I think I was really intrigued by some of the work shared by David, the kind of the thinking behind the kind of the vagueness of scale and materiality is really really inspiring. But again, I think this is something we probably all share in terms of pursuing this interest in finding the kind of the more relevance and also agency in the design disciplines today. So in light of that kind of very kind of quick framing that I just introduced, these are the three projects I want to just quickly kind of run through with you guys. The first is a design, more like a kind of traditional sense of design thesis project I did 6 years ago. It was my master thesis project at the GSD. And the second project I'm gonna just very briefly introduce. It's more like a kind of research publication book project. Because of the nature of it, I can't show you guys physically the book, so I'm just gonna go through the idea of the book and also how that relates to the larger picture of the works here. And the last project is most recent work I've done at Syracuse. It's an exhibition plus kind of documentation for the teaching at the school. And I think most importantly, what I'm interested in is kind of the cross pollination between the three modes of knowledge production, basically designing, researching, teaching, which is, again, I guess all of you guys do here. And I'm, as I just entered the kind of the teaching academia realm, I'm really kind of looking forward to finding more kind of constructive paths in terms of combining and really instigating these different modes of thinking and production. So for the first project, for me, this is, I would say, the starting point for a lot of the work I do now. And it's actually the starting point for my doctorate dissertation at the GSD, which I'm still working on. It's an urban design thesis. And what I'm trying to do is really to, first of all, maybe to kind of fold agenda here for this project. When I was doing it, the first really is to really understand the logic behind the formation of the if you will, ultra large mega plot block formation or urbanization in China. and second is really to find how can designers, even planners and policymakers start to intervene these mode of urbanization, in this case specifically in China, and to really generate more positive effects and spaces and relations for the society. So it starts with a very simple observation that if you look at the Google map for most of the Chinese city, not every, but most, especially in the modern cities, one of the most prominent aspects of their urbanization is really the kind of the deployment I was mentioning of the so-called mega plot. And this is basically a very quick comparison in terms of scale between the kind of different large mega plots across the world. And this actually, for me, brings out the research question for the project. First of all, why most of the Chinese cities, their formations, urban formations, are defined in such large bonded figure, and second, what are the driving forces for this urban morphology or urban form and mode of urban production? So for me, in the process of answering those questions, I kind of deployed a historical methodology in mapping out 3 kinds of what I call genealogy here. First is an urban block genealogy that really traces the evolution of urban block formation. As you see here, it's kind of course, it's a bit kind of simplified just for the sake of making an argument. This really tries to flesh out the finding that the Chinese urban block always exhibits a kind of collectivity through the relational composition between singular building forms and hierarchical relations between urban blocks, let's say streets and public spaces. And the second genealogy actually traces the transition of, let's say, the architectural types in the evolution of Chinese blocks, mainly through the venue of, let's say, architecture plans. And the main finding or discovery here is that the deep structure of the building typologies have moved significantly from a horizontal and low density structure to a vertical and high density one. At the same time, as you see the kind of the relationship between circulational space and living space or living cells, they become much more separated, and also the kind of a shared open space and the individual living spaces are again gradually separated from each other as the scale of the block increases over time. And the third genealogy really looks at the community and the social structure as the basic unit of governance across the Chinese history. Of course, again, this is a kind of very, in a way, kind of a simplified diagram to make the case. But the argument is that despite the historical upheavals and all the political transitions, there seems to be a kind of stability in terms of form of its spatial organization and social relations across different historical periods. That form is not defined by the singular architectural forms, but rather the relations between the singularities of building forms. So based on these findings, the design proposition starts with the hypothesis that maybe we could develop a kind of urban prototype that really sets out to reconfigure, based on the kind of the 3 findings or genealogies that I developed, a kind of framework or relational spatial organization that kind of combines or hybridizes the traditional horizontal city and also the kind of topological deep structure extracted from the contemporary architectural types. I'm just gonna go through some of the images and the final products. What I see this project as is really a kind of framework or urban prototype, as I was mentioning earlier, that is to be served as a open structure that also allows a maximum of flexibility in terms of adapting to changing urban conditions, mode of governance, and also pragmatic needs. And the kind of the scale and also the actual exact dimension of the block and the buildings are actually extracted from the traditional horizontal city. And also fixtures a mix of, again, scale typology, social organizations, the mat, the height, the pencil tower, and also semi-communal courtyards buildings, bar buildings. Again, this is just one potential version of many possibilities. For me, I think it's the network of the public and communal spaces and the relations between different scales and programs is really interesting and important for this prototype, and which is also something I would argue could be seen as a kind of direct response to the often heavily criticized and mono-scale and mono-function mega plot development in China. I mean, this is the model that I did, the kind of the top-down view of the model, trying to capture 3 different scales all together. Again, for me, I think this is a test, is a kind of demonstration of the kind of compositional, relational urban design approach, operating as a common framework in the city at multiple scales at once, hopefully, the superblock, the building, and also the interior housing units. Also, one thing I didn't mention, of course, I'm happy to discuss further about it, is the location, the site. For the thesis as a kind of project, it was cited in my hometown in China, which is Xi'an. But the importance of, or the potential of this project is really to serve as a kind of replicable model that can be readapted into a wider range of contemporary Chinese cities, of course, with the limit to be further tested. And the second project I'm going to just quickly go through, but also it's going to be a little bit of shifting gears. This is a kind of slightly different kind of project. This has been a part of a more recent project that has been centered around the idea of commons. So as I was mentioning earlier, and for me, this effort of working on this subject is really condensed through the editing of this most recent issue of New Geography Journal at Harvard University. Again, because of the nature of the project, I wanted to kind of bring out the larger idea, what's the relevance, and then I'm just gonna go through some of the interior pages, just so you can get a sense. The volume actually was co-edited by myself and my friend and colleague Mojita Mojave at the GSD, and the book, I have to say this because it was sponsored by the Grant Foundation, also Harvard University. We managed to assemble 25 designers, scholars, and activists and thinkers, of course, to delineate the historical and theoretical knowledge that really shapes the idea of commons today, and also photographers, I forgot to mention. So in this volume, we framed the central issue of commons through kind of a triangular relationship between 3 factors: the commons, the commoner, and the commoning. So the commons, which are broadly referred or defined as the shared resources, in a way, I think the platform that you guys are building, the digital futures, is a commons, I think. And the commoner, which are the communities that share and kind of protect the common interests through theories of, let's say, social relations, rules, and practices. And then lastly, the commoning really is the process of forming and negotiating such social and kind of practical relations. Our contributors have kind of each dissected these 3 factors and their interrelations from a very extremely diverse set of fields, from political theory, landscape and ecology, of course, architecture and urban theory activism, and also communicating engagement, photography, visual media. So in particular, I wanted to say that the relationship between the commenting process and alternative modes of social and spatial productions has been foregrounded in this volume. And this is also one of the driving forces for us to do this, as I was mentioning earlier, to really bring this stream of knowledge into the design field. As we all know, probably the commenting process continuously involves the substances of space, be it physical or for virtual or material or cultural. This concept has, we were trying to make a case and argument in the introductory essay that really has actively contributed to the reshaping of, let's say, the spatial imagination, such as islands, archipelagos, and thresholds. A lot of the kind of contemporary designers and theorists are also taking on that thread in terms of, again, the kind of the potentiality between social relations and spatial imaginations. And so the volume also, I think it's a timely, let's say, contribution to a larger field, of course, from a more kind of slightly focused perspective of architecture and design in terms of addressing this pressing social and environmental justice issues, not just in the States, but also I think in the broader context in the world. And we particularly interested in kind of expanding the discourse of commons into a planetary territory or kind of space, meaning not just the human-centered world and environment, but also the non-human side of it in relation to the design disciplines. So we have a kind of scholar, and she also happens to be kind of amateur photographer. She contributed this beautiful but rarely seen image of the undersea bat, actually the kind of the micro, what is the word for it? Anyhow, the kind of the community that you would actually, a non-human community, you would actually otherwise would not have, have seen actually in relation to the kind of a larger discussion to the space and shared space as a larger social and biopolitical project. I'm just gonna skip this. So I just want to again maybe just to emphasize that again, it's the book actually was published last year, but for us it's really for me especially an ongoing project. Actually, in my teaching last year at Syracuse, I was able to kind of integrate some of the ideas that I learned from this work into the form of my teaching and also research, which I would say, fortunately, with the support of the school and also the students, have become a more expansive, inclusive framework. Which brings me to this last project I want to show. I think I'm good on time. Okay, so this is an exhibition that I kind of collectively produced last year as part of my teaching and research work at Syracuse University School of Architecture. So for me, I think at large, this is really the kind of embodiment of the collective project and process where research, teaching, and design speculation can, kind of distill into a larger intellectual project. Again, this project was made and sponsored by the Henry de Boghossian Fellowship Program at Syracuse Architecture. Zigong would know this. He also taught at Syracuse. Actually, I only met Zigong virtually. But anyhow, as this exhibition was also made possible by the team that I was able to assemble together, Roy, Zhang, Wendy Lee, and also Lu Zhang, who actually helped really and contribute enormously for the final finalization of this project. So at large, for me, the exhibition is really about the multiplicity of, let's say, perspectives, scales, and representations in the context of design research and speculation. And this picture actually captures the room of the gallery room of the school, which is basically a very rectangular kind of typical room, but the room has been decorated with this very lavish material, very rich, extremely rich material. The marble, the room is actually called Marble Room. The exhibition layout actually features a very straightforward layout, very simple. And for me, that actually corresponds to the great iron pattern on the floor, which you see actually here on the picture. The positioning of the book stands at the two ends of the room, and also the big model or big object, which I'll talk a little bit more. Actually, they're positioned perfectly aligned with the pattern on the floor. So this larger central object for me entails a large singular object or model with multiple scales. And I would say probably there are 3 scales. And this object itself is kind of compresses maybe 3 projects at once for me. At least that's the way I would tell the story. At first, it can be seen as a kind of interior object, obviously kind of a larger frame, almost at the scale of furniture in the room. That kind of creates a visual centrality, if you will, in the room. And second, as you see on the left-hand side image or diagram, it can be seen as a kind of architectural model with 4 level building frames that also forms an atrium-like space in the middle. And the thickness of the slabs, if you will, the floors and the columns also shifts in a subtle way from the bottom to the top, and also the space in between them. And third, it also can be viewed as a, let's say, reimagined urban block, which is something I have been very much interested in. That consists, in this case, consists of 9 urban blocks in the middle here. I don't know if you can see the pointer here. As part of a larger ideal city plan. So one thing I do want to mention is people, oftentimes I get asked about what's the difference between this, let's say, the typology of towers situated in a field or a mat type like buildings. So in this case, all the vertical spaces or towers are public owned and they are public programmed. Which is really, for me, it's a kind of a manifestation of this trying to define or finding an alternative reality of outside of this capitalistic world. And this is a diagram showing the lattice structure that integrates the 3 scales all together on the left-hand side image. And also the kind of the physical scale of the structure components. Again, I just wanted to mention, like, they also vary very subtly according to the relationship between different layers and different elements across the different heights of the model. And again, this is like the scale of the 4 levels within the building frame. They also shifts. This model itself is painted white, which I think is a very straightforward and simple response to the overly decorated and lavish kind of materiality around the model, right? So for me, that kind of presents the volume and also the changing and shifting scales in the most kind of straightforward way. But all the furnishings, furniture pieces, right, within the frame and also within the blocks, they're kind of painted with copper-like color. To kind of make the contrast between the kind of larger spatial framework and also the kind of everydayness and the human kind of, if you will, related daily activities and spaces. So I'm gonna just gonna run through a series of images. Just kind of the idea is really to zoom in further and further so that you can kind of see the how this scale actually shifts. This is basically the most kind of smallest scale where the urbanistic feel, I would say, in the background, that view is always present, and which is also, I was hoping to make the argument that this kind of compressment of different, at least 3 scales all at once is always being present when you walk around and view the model. So this is a video, documentary video produced by one of my students, Hector Yu. So the model really, I think, sets the stage for us to view and also experience and imagine this constructed scene, and also ideas by bringing these thematic experiences. And again, the urban view is always present when you walk around the model, yet this full view of the urban scale is only possible through this, as you see on the screen, kind of projected top live feed camera that captures the kind of if you will, the kind of totality view of the top down of this model, and also kind of animating the relationship between the viewers and also the model. But because of the limitation of the technology we had back then, the resolution of the image was not super ideal, but you get what I'm trying to say. So this is the kind of the totality view presented here as rather kind of a conventional plan, but I would argue it's not a reality, but actually a constructed imagination, which is exactly the point of the show, which is really to, for me, put forward a call for a more rigorous and innovative cultivation on this mode of thinking of multiplicity of perspectives and scales and representations, especially in dealing with architecture and the relationship between architecture and the city. And these are just some snapshots of the opening night of the show. But this, before I end, this is the kind of individuals and also the teams I have been so fortunate to work with in the past years. This is one thing I have to say about being academia. I think it's really about the kind of opportunity and platform to meet great people and minds. I guess that's pretty much it for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you, Wang Liang. Actually, a little personal history. I think Wang Liang and I were in the same band during our college study.
Good old days. 5 years.
I mean, I think it's great to see how your thought and works evolved through the years, and your current research. I think it's very important. Well, I think it's always there, the relationship between form and social political agendas in the architectural discipline. We can see like from the 1970s, and also works like ArchiZooms, and there's always a kind of reference. I think let's keep rolling, and let's now invite our fourth speaker and the last one, Niro, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the inspirational conversation, and especially David. We're just talking about how amazing WeSpa was with a dear friend of mine from Sarah too in Copenhagen. So it's refreshing to see some bathhouse work from LA, and it's again amazing work related to the camera and green screen, which is also my other interest. And Liang, I always find it so interesting to blew my ideas up to the urban fabric, and that was a really inspirational conversation. Again, last but not least, thank you for inviting me to the conversation, and I'll also be teaching a small seminar in Digital Future. So if you're interested, please sign up. Here, let me share my screen. All right. So, hello everyone. My conversation is going to be about the main focus of my practice and my teaching direction, which is under the topic of quasi-autonomous workflow. I would divide my conversation in these two half of the major topic using this type of workflow. One is automation, one is physical construction. And my name is Nirohi, and I was born and raised in Beijing. I graduated 2 years ago from SciArc as a pandemic baby. So, which later on you will understand why I start to research on, this type of workflow, which is strongly related to, how we, got really restricted in during the pandemic. Now I am a visiting professor at Virginia Tech, teaching architecture studios and seminars, and also lead a undergraduate thesis concentration area on the topic of conscious content creation. This is my little practice. The name of it's Here and Aegon, and if you're interested, look it up. I'm not gonna get into it. But so first of all, I really want to talk about how the use of computer becomes a thing from beginning with to purely replace labor work. So in 1928, when the Enigma code is, really flourishing during the wars, and the Germans are trying to use it to send it to their peers, and to invade and attack other cities. So this really, really small group of female in London was gathered up to constantly deciphering the Enigma code, hoping for finding a final, answer, which is purely labor, and they're just keep trying and trying and trying. The chance of deciphering in the code is really, really low, until Alan Turing developed the Turing machine in 1936, and purely replaced the labor work of deciphering the code, and it can be fast and effective and try to figure out the code within a day. And it has been shortened the war, according to report, by 2 years. So speaking of machines and computer, the history of design software has been populated from 1992, when Rhino becomes a really accessible software, until today. We have all these sort of different software to work with in practice and in school, and which lands me this question. What is the future of the machine? Do we want everything to be predetermined and make the calculation in advance and be the smartest AI in the cloud that tells us what we want to see every moment in the world? Or we just want something playful, sometimes random and unexpected, and something special? So these are the true questions I start to ask myself when I was back in SciArc, and I have to go back home and sitting in my own small room and think about how my thesis is going to be like when I am such a pro model maker from so everything kind of collapses, and I have to try to find the reasons within the limitation, and then think about the relationship between me and the computer, which I wanted to show you this important Plask project.
The Colloquy of Mobiles was designed by Gordon Pask, who was as much an artist as he was a scientist. And the idea behind Colloquy is to have a family of mobiles interacting on their own. Each mobile is completely independent, has its own brain, and it rotates on its axis, and some of them rotate on a bar. And serendipitously, they come to a certain moment when they start to interact. Mostly they're on their own, they're just doing what they're doing. But on a particular occasion, they interact. When a light from the male figure hits the mirror of the female figure by chance and reflects back to the male figure, then they stop and they start to interact. They wait a while and they have this kind of thing going. And then after a while they calm down and then they return to interact with machines. And by the way, people can interact with these mobiles too. too. That's important. But nowadays, wait a minute. Machines are interacting with machines all the time. The machines in our pocket are talking to machines in your pocket, whether or not we're interacting with them at that moment. So how has the world changed? And what does it mean to have these things so much a part of our lives? Every day, every moment, machines interact with machines, people interacting with machines. It's part of our lives. How can we reflect on that in looking at this playful, wacky, outer space, but still biological thing, organic set of forms? It's really quite cool.
So I found myself into this, conversation about this amazing Gordon Pask piece, and that was, the beginning of the pandemic. After forced to go home and everything. Start to think about, okay, maybe this is a chance for me to think about what is my relationship between my computer and the tools I've been using all the time, and try to figure out how to communicate with it and do further project with my computer at the same time. So that's when the conversation becomes such a workflow on the title of quasi-autonomous workflow. So to me, the quasi, which is half and half, the designer collaborate with the computer, and we curate the result. So it's not like I'm taking over the computer's design work, or the computer is taking over my work. It's a collaborative process. And the autonomous is what we both do the best. I do my own curatorial work, and the computer is really pro at optimizing and automated limitless possibility. So that becomes one of my biggest focus. So to put it into a really sweet and short diagram, if you consider computer as your tool, then the input and output is really direct, right? So you know what to expect, but which is normally been seen in rabbit model. If you consider computer as a black box and try to absolutely let the computer override your design process, then that's where the AI again start to start to step in. And you completely don't know the process of it in the middle, or you don't even have to, but somehow you have an output and you start to think about what the output means. But to me, I want to consider my computer as a collaborator. So the workflow in the middle is extremely transparent. I know what I'm aiming for, but I don't know what to expect. So it needs to have multiple tries with this workflow has been created. And then each try is your communication with the computer, and then you get out different outputs. So in a way, we are not here to be a computer engineer or a computer architect, but at least by having this workflow put out there and then having this process of working, it makes the workflow or the work I've done not only about simple hand gestures around the computer. There's a meaningful underlying connections I'm trying to make right here. So with that being said, the first type of work I want to introduce is on the topic of automation. And automation is also a continuous study from my thesis work by SciArc, which here I want to give a shout out to Peter Tessa and Devin Weiser, who are my thesis instructors. And this type of work is a continuous conversation after I have my thesis project at SciArc. So this is like really short, not clips, but like chapter of my thesis. So what I did is I created a camera, and then I used the computer to clone the cameras into in the stage set, and then use a limited randomizer to allow the camera to see randomly. Then I'm able to have this unhuman-centric view of seeing architecture, a spatial product, which later on I realized that this idea is extremely aligned with amazing film director Lars von Trier, And he had done this process for a movie called Boss of It All. Let me play a short clip. Automation is his word, by the way. I kind of adapted it in my practice.
Was a reaction against the handheld camera, because the handheld camera I used a lot. I'm very happy for the handheld camera because I'm a person who really enjoys logic, and the handheld camera, I can understand the logic behind it. I can see that a handheld camera can be a person that is really watching, and it was very nice for me to come around the problem of framing, because in my mind there's not a lot of logic in framing, but pointing, as we called it with the camera, there was a lot of logic in that. Some of the films that I liked very much was screwball comedies, and all these films were mainly fixed cameras. And then I got the idea of using a computer to help me to kind of randomize the framing.
To put it simply, automation is a random placement of the camera. The director does not control where the camera is and where it's pointing. To make it work for actually making a movie like this, we put some restrictions on how random the camera movement is.
First of all, it gave me the freedom not to control too much. The work was to give the limitations of the computer's freedom. The computer could say you have to pan 2-3 degrees to the right or whatever. We made a lot of experiments to say, but can it also be allowed to pan 5 degrees, or is that too much? That is super Italian. You have to give it some limitations. I'm deciding, but I am just deciding in a much more unprecise way.
What we
So I want to show you this last
camera is. And that affected
part
the way
when the
that
actor is talking about how he's
the boss of it all, because
You could easily end up outside the picture. And one thing an actor doesn't like is being out of the picture. So you could maybe bend the rules a little bit, and if you could spot a monster way over there, you can see if you did like this, you'd be in the picture. I heard about some other guys doing that.
the actors actually.
so you can clearly see the actors so frustrated because the camera is always randomizing the frames, and which intensified the idea of Last Frontier wanted to break the connection between the director, which is known to focusing on certain views of the space, by capturing unexpected views within certain limitations. He is acting as a curator to find get all the clips together and delete the things that is not wanted, to create a film that is within the collaboration of him and the machine. So with that concept in mind, I start to utilize the ready-made cameras in visual space, and here's the idea, really first idea of how to use this camera force-room to slice object and then capturing space. On the left hand side is this objects being cutted. On the right hand side you can see there's two type of camera views are literally seeing what they could see within the square. Nothing has changed, but if you zoom out, you start to see the other unimportant information has been deleted, which is also interesting to use as a space or material sampling tool. And later on, when I was teaching with Don Weiss and Pierre Testa at SIRE for their vertical studios, I've been asked to develop tools to utilize camera and randomized camera to receive the space, and then upcycled and recurated already known space into different type of spatial information, and these are all like really early first tries. And you can see the right hand side is a Frankfurt kitchen. The Frankfurt kitchen literally start to become a space within a space, and there are students. I'm not going to show any student project from this workshop, but they literally turn fabrication into architecture. The left-hand side is this like literally really narrow space, but having 3 cameras, using this random ideas, observing the space at the same time, new spatial information start to appear. It doesn't make sense, but also it kind of makes sense at the same time in this in between weird zone. So later on, I taught this class at Virginia Tech, the seminar called the depth of forestrooms. I asked my students to use camera forestrooms as a technique to slice architectural information out of the system and then use a green screen in the back and then layering them up. Here, let me show you. Oh, sorry. Layering them up to create different spatial informations. So we actually sampled 4 really famous housing projects, including the Style House in LA, the Villa Sava, Hirosaki House, and Peter Ansman's House 6. And after students are like using the observation limited randomized view to sample all these views, they start to stitch them together. And because the way they limited the camera to sample the views are very much related to the logic, how this architecture has been created, you start to see this like intensified architecture elements and design ideas has been like bursting out of this process. You see like the Style House becomes a really, really long shrine looking space, or sometimes it can be, this never ending trying to figure out what is the next Style House is by using the Style House information. And House 6 by Peter Ansman becomes this really teeny tiny narrow space, and you barely can see people occupying in the space, which is basically what Peter Ansman wanted from beginning with, in terms of how human body is reacted to, this discomfort, between wall space. And Hirosaki House by Taro Ando becomes this tunnel vision of views and frames and backdrop and foreground and background. And the Villa Sava is just they use pillar as one of the strategies, and you can see pillar has been optimized because they put pillar at the middle. I mean columns in the pillar. The columns in the middle, so you don't really see that many columns anymore. They're all aligned in this middle frame when they layer up in a digital space. But you can see like all the other architecture information start to appear and disappear. But in a way, you can still recognize this is Villa Sava just by remnants of it. That's this class, and back to presentation mode. Oh, so I just came back from a really, really long, exciting, but also ended up becomes a little dreadful European trip because I was responding to this call by Aaron Besky. There are 7 of us young architecture designers are being collected in an island of Italy called Capri. We lived on the island for 28 days to try to imagine, speculate the future design of Capri 2.0 in order to respond to the 100 years of anniversary of architects back in the days when they speculate Capri 1.0. So excuse me. So my design work is about the like the landscape of Capri, which is needs some explanation behind the saying. So Capri is an island that was being known as a homosexual haven back in the days. During war times, there are a lot of Germans, go to Capri, purchase expensive villas, and be with local young males. So right now, Capri becomes this like shopping center almost, and then people just go there to have the most expensive holiday experience and just get out of there, which is a little sad and kind of loses authenticness in terms of the identity of the island. So my design is responding to the idea of what has been celebrated is the permanent fixed stone walls, which is carved into the landscape, becomes part of the landscape. And these walls are the Roman remains, which can be dated back like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But people came in and they take the most precious stuff away. They left the takeable elements untakeable. I mean, couldn't move the elements on the island and becomes part of the landscape. And later on, you start to realize that Capri, this island, is all about how people having this resistance and to the local environment and just truly just trying to make it work. And there are a lot of temporary elements in Capri, including scaffoldings, clothes, and awnings and boxes, just filling this really narrow alleys. When you're on the island, you truly do not understand you're on the island. You're on a constant incline, which make you feel like you're on the landscape, but you never see the ocean view, never see waterfronts at all. And so I wanted to use Automation, the camera, to help to work on this project under the name of Force Fit, which is also the idea of make it work, just like how the culture of Capri has been. So I have created like different type of scaffoldings, prototypes, which is being collected and upcycled by local materials. These scaffoldings are being documented and reorganized in such a way. So there are 3 prototypes. One is this weird box that has a slanted slope, and you can see it's not really a perfect box. The box can only work when the box is being planted on the Capri slope. Otherwise, the stair will be, having certain angles. You cannot really work on it. So it's really like all the boxes are speaking to a certain locality of the island and of the landscape. And the second box is you can only place the box when there is a rooftop to occupy. And the third one is the box, because it's so sloppy, the side of the box can unfold without structure support, so you have to have certain walls to support it at the same time. And later on, like these are just study of how these boxes will unfold and kind of curated together into fitting different scenarios. And you see the opening of the box, which is the major discovery, or here. Well, not discovery, but the major idea of this project is to try to think about how automation is related to architecture structural elements at the same time. So the right-hand side image is, because Capri has been known for the Garden of Eden, I'm just literally being really funny here, like putting the Garden of Eden features with scaffolding materials and see, it's almost like a joke, but not really. And it is still ongoing. I haven't finished it. This is my first time presenting it. It's because the limitation of the island, we cannot really get access to internet quite well. So these are all like really small samples to think about how views and temporary structures to speak to the local permanent landscape and walls and all the other infrastructures within the small alleys. And let's go to the next chapter. Hopefully I'm good on time. Next chapter is about physical construction, and phygital is the word Peter Testa came out start to make it as a thing. It's a combination of physical and digital, and the whole idea is trying to figure out what can be the new type of way of thinking about construction and materials within the exchange between physical and digital, fabrication and construction techniques. And this is a really another small chapter of my thesis, which is trying to figure out how digital materials with physicality ideas in mind, how can they be how can the visual materials being fabricated in such a way, and which I found this book really relatable to the ideas, which the name of the book is called Understanding Molecule Typography by H.F. Henderson. And he's basically trying, like one day came up with this book, taking every single typography in English language and try to break it down as if it's in a molecular way. And it's really, really convincing. Every single chapter you see is like as real as they can be, and like you even questioning, is that how typography becomes designed from beginning with, or it's just some sort of a parafiction and it's just kind of executed well? To me, this is how I understand the digital construction. You have to take something from the physical and take it apart and reassemble it with the collaboration of your computer, and then try to make something else. It's almost like how he make this this molecule typography, logical sense. So the first project I want to present is on the title of Textile Hacking Lab, which is a seminar I started co-taught by me and the senior design faculty, which also I mentioned before, Peter Testa. And when I came up with this workflow, basically the idea is you treat digital materials as real as they can be. Digital materials are constantly being seen as a slap of image on a surface because we're so familiar with surface modeling in digital tools. But in this case, we literally examine how the textile are being made, including how a single wool is being torn, formed into this one. The single wool is being formed by multiple hairs, and then how the hairs is drawn together to form a textile, and then how the textile is being digitally applied to a template surface, and then the template surface was not really being rendered out, but the exterior cloned textile is being rendered out. So you almost see like this sweater looking thing on the lion is as real as they can be because it has been digitally fabricated in a physical way. So they have a thickness, they respond to simulations, yada yada yada. And we applied, this is me, we applied on human bodies just to make it as try to figure out what is this, what materiality it looks like. And here are some of the student works, and you can see some really interesting effects start to unfold itself. Some hair becomes extremely thick, and some hairs becomes not as connected as they could be in the physical world. And then later on the conversation becomes like, if this is the true inspiration of how we wanted to make this textile to be true, what materials we're going to use, since the wool is too thick, right? Are we still going to use wool? Probably not. And is the fabrication machines need to be changed to adapt to this form of fabrication? Probably yes. So it's a true, uphill battle fighting against the standardization of how a production could be. Just by collaborating the computer, a lot of new thing kind of unfold itself. And then this class, which I taught in Virginia Tech, on the title of A Pile of Things, and we start to take this visual construction ideas into architecture form, architecture scale, macro scale. So my students are kind of making this, pile of architectural information, not like they cannot be scaled up or scaled down. They're just the right scale as how they sample from real life. And we're trying to see how this visual construction is allowing them to create a interesting composition of how architectural elements start to compile together to construct a spatial installation at this moment. And the class I'm gonna I'll be teaching in the workshop in Digital Future is the next level of this class, which we are actually understanding the joints in between how each material is being assembled. And I'm going to skip some of the project. Running on time. I want to present this last project, which is a collaboration between me and a really, really amazing Chinese fabrication artist, Feng Lin, and she basically she do this fabrication work founded in the Yunnan province by when she was researching on the tie-dye process in Yunnan, and she kind of take the byproduct of the tie-dye, which is the sewing in the middle, and make it as a sculpture. So she kind of make things. And one day she kind of came to me, and then she's like, "Hey, what if you take your digital construction ideas on my pieces? How are they gonna look like?" So basically, these are her work. So basically, I start to taking the idea of like unfold her work in this digital way. We start to like literally sample every single fabrication techniques she's been using on her project, and then recombine them together into digital process, and ask the machine, ask the computer to randomize the combination within limitation, within a rhythm. And this is our first try. So, and then the most interesting thing is she remake what I've been made in digital world, and she remake this, and she said it's truly astonishing because a lot of techniques in this process will not be her own process because they're so against the traditional way of doing this, doing her fabrication. So she had to figure out a new way of doing her work just because the computer, the collaboration between me and computer gave her the new fresh eye of looking at her project. And later on, we got invited by Adidas to do 2 digital installation in Shanghai A3 store and Chengdu A3 store. So we created this project called She's Blue, and on the right-hand side is my initial proposal for the project, collaborating computer again in this quasi-autonomous workflow, and she remake her piece accordingly. So these are just some snapshots, and you can see these are digital stuff. Her physical installation is the front of the digital screen, so you truly see the exchange happening. Here, I just want to play this in fast way so you can see how materials are being treated over here. And we just had a really good news about 2 weeks ago. We are invited to do another piece for the 12th Faber Art Biennale exhibition in the Yunnan National Museum in China. So hopefully we can bring this digital materials ideas into the next level. And one day, maybe it will be a great inspiration for architecture construction. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niro. I think it's very interesting approach. You kind of twisted the digital design procedures and in terms of creating novel forms. And also, I'm very looking forward to the foreseen outcomes of your workshop in Digital Futures next week. So now for the presentations are done, and actually we see a lot of kind of comments between not all of them, but maybe by pairing, for example, between Zigong and Niro, we see a lot of interesting dialogues between architecture and the film techniques, and also like between David and Wang Liang, we see how they address the concept of scale in different scenarios. Also, David and Niro, you are also dealing with the differences and similarities between the physical and the digital. So there's a lot of I think uncharted territories we can discuss. But I also know that it's getting very late in the United States, so maybe let's try keep it shorter and more casual. I just read some like general questions, but if you, I think all of you can feel free to jump in and to respond and also to talk to each other. And also we could have some questions from the audience if there's any. So, well, I think in general, I want to firstly go back to the statement Zigong made at the very beginning, saying, well, he said himself is an architect without architecture, and I see the common. Well, there's a lot of comments. I think it's shared through the whole 4 presentations today. So my first question is, from all you presented in the works in terms of form, it's beyond what we usually recognize as buildings, or the form you produce, for example, in David's work or in Wang Liang in the vision project you showed in the end. They are not really kind of intended to be built, but they are something else. So my first question is what's your proposition to this kind of dichotomy of architecture as either an intellectual practice or, on the other hand, a construction practice? It's a general question, but I think you feel free to add anything in your mind. Maybe let's keep the order. Maybe from Zigong, if you want to say something.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, I think people in China will know that the atmosphere of the whole, you know, both in education and practice area in architecture is basing on like a lot of commercial practice there. So, and the education also is not like the situation in the US. So it's a kind of a satire or self, you know, how to say in English, is kind of a 自嘲, that saying I'm an architect without architecture. So basically it is basing on the different project, different commission by, you know, it is not, our project is mostly commit by, you know, the art institute or exhibition. So is highly depends on what kind of a project is. And so the projects I show that is not for the you know, is different from the practicing in building, and there's also a different agenda behind the different projects in exhibition, in different exhibition. So I'm a little bit envy or how to say, I'm very appreciate that the continuous imitation atmosphere of the young architects in the US. And I also have benefited a lot from the share of today's architects from the US. So I also think is really the time that we need to rethink what we need to talk in today's architectural education. Um, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that answered your question. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think in most of the cases it's commission driven, and that's why also I think it's because we nowadays have more and more exhibitions, biennales around architectural circles, so we have more kind of capabilities to express the ideas to the general public, not through buildings, but through kind of installations, drawings, those kind of small scale. We are more capable of control. So then that's I think that's lead to what I want to ask David. I think when you present your project, the project in the Mexico, I think it's very interesting. I didn't see the real rendering of the project, but I assume it's kind of normal than the installation you did for the gallery. So you have kind of two parallel, more is more kind of you have full control of it, but on the other hand, you have a real project that is I assume it will be limited by a lot of real scenarios and the budget, like the client himself or herself. So I would like to ask, what's your position when you're working with these two different worlds?
Yeah, well, I love that question, and I mean, I think it's probably similar to maybe what everybody else might say. I think that when we do this type of work, we're kind of doing in many ways I hope is a kind of research, and I think that maybe is a new idea for architecture as a field. Maybe, I don't know, 200 years ago, whatever. Like maybe research looked more not like that, but there were always treatises. There was always people sort of putting something out there about ideas about buildings, and maybe that's how we sort of can think of these things. I mean, I think the work that I showed you today is not, it's not no built buildings because they're not built yet. So that's what I got. But at the same time, I think all of us probably might sort of stay in that world, that there are ideas that can sort of surround making buildings and why one would make them and make them in a certain way. And sometimes you can hopefully do it by actually executing those buildings. But I always thought, like, you would want to, before you got to do a building, you'd want to have like I don't know, why are you going to do it the way you're going to do it? Why are you going to make it that way? Or why should people want it that way? And so I think like some space to sort of speculate on that is a gift. It's really, but I think it's also kind of important. So sometimes you're speculating on things that are directly about a building, but sometimes you're speculating on stuff that's, hopefully about giving something back to kind of the broader field, whether it's, new tools or ways of seeing, like in Niro's work, or whether it's new ideas about, I don't know, like scenes and film, like we're seeing, or urbanism. These are things that maybe are helpful for your own work, but hopefully they're also helpful for other people. So I think it's about building, that's, I guess, research is not just for yourself, but it's really about sort of building a kind of broader field, I guess. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I think what you are saying is a kind of gift given by the nature of our discipline, so we can try and feel and again to test a lot of ideas. But someday when we got a chance to a real project, we have enough things in our repertories to really execute and to somehow be prepared for that. Is that what you are trying to?
Well, maybe. I wouldn't say it's in preparation for, like, it's lesser than doing the building. I think it's equal. But to me, like doing an installation and doing a building, obviously they involve a lot of different kinds of things, but they're both, I think, or whether it's developing a new app or a drawing or I don't know, a book, I think I could see those all as somewhat equal. Like even if it never leads to, you never get to build a building, I think you could still contribute so much to architecture. So I don't know. It's more of maybe a more expansive view of like than architects only being there to execute a building. I personally think we still should aim for it, even if we don't get those commissions. I'm not super interested in like the completely separate from the idea of speculating on something that has to do with the urban world of material forms. But regardless of whatever we do, like I think it's, you know, it's something that I think is just as important as getting to build it, because sometimes we're not in charge of whether we get to build our things that we want to do. So fortunately,
even in terms of the unbuilt, there's two kind of categories. One is the project is intended to be built, but somehow it's not getting realized. But on the other hand, we have another categories. Essentially, it's not really for be built, but for something else to test the ideas or to broader the disciplinaries. I think that's how architecture evolves a long time.
If I can, sorry,
Yeah.
Charles. Sorry to interrupt. I think, you know, what David just said reminds me of I think one lecture given by Peter Eisman like a long time ago, and in which he made this distinction of between project and practice, which I found it's probably a good way of kind of responding to the question. And obviously he would characterize his own work all as projects, where he has a very strong attitude towards kind of practice. I think he has a very specific attitude towards that. But I think what I find quite interesting across all the projects I've seen today from Zugong, David, and Nero are probably that I think they're all projects in a way. And what's interesting is each one of you all have your own practice in a way, right? But that practice is informed by a project. And I think that is something, the project which shared for each of you certain kind of intellectual agenda and rationale. I think that's what I think are probably becoming more popular among our generation, I would say, as a way of kind of finding a way of practice, I think. But also I think it just, as you were saying, in the time of preparing for getting the real commission, I think that's the way to kind of, you know, finding alternatives as both a kind of intellectual, conceptual, but also practical kind of approach.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, I agree. But I think one thing for your case is more unique. No, I think all the works we see today is I think it's more conceptual in terms of like its relation to conceptual art. It's the projects you need to really expand a lot and to so we can see the ideas behind them. And for your project, it's also the same. Not only the exhibition project, but also the thesis project you did at Harvard GSD. So I have a particular question to you. Since currently, when we're dealing with urban issues, there's a really kind of dominant trend where we see data, we see smart technologies are really the fundamental driver of how we dealing with urban issues, how we design kind of urban structures. But in your case, yours more kind of theoretical, conceptual approach to the urban space. So how you see the dialect or the conflicts I see between the two?
Very good question, actually. I think, first of all, just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert in the kind of technology in terms of, or seeing urban issues during a kind of technological perspective. in smart city. I know something about smart city, but I'm definitely not an expert in that field. But what I would probably say is my approach to understanding urban problems or issues are primarily through historical and cultural lenses, which I think is obvious and biased, but I think it's still extremely relevant and important. Even that these currently a lot of the problems or phenomena are driven by the more advanced technology and infrastructure. What I'm trying to do, or what I've been doing in my, started with my thesis and also now in my doctoral dissertation, is really to look back to find, logic or structural logic in history to at least understand the present. Of course, I don't think that can solve or explains everything for the fast changing world and technology. But for example, the case in my case, right, like the idea of urban form or the concept of superblock, I was trying to argue or make the argument through the historical evolution and morphological kind of lineage. And that actually, I was trying to make the argument without getting too much specifics in there. The kind of the idea of scale in the Chinese society, and also the kind of the relational structure in the Chinese society, and also the kind of always the pursuit of largeness in a culture, and also in the formation of a lot of the social relations. That has been the kind of the focal points that I was trying to dig out through that perspective. But at the same time, I think that the technology or the kind of emerging infrastructure can certainly help in that as well, in terms of finding the transformations or the changes, or just how that has impacted the society in terms of the space and the kind of the social structures. But I think there's always a space for the kind of historical and cultural perspective, which also is something I, in a recent kind of conversation I had with another person, kind of the specificity of cultural context, which is something for me is quite important. As you know, like being educated in China, and then I kind of started my journey here in the States, kind of being exposed to both cultures. I find it's really fascinating to kind of to see the same problem sometimes through one of the many different, or one of the many different lenses or cultural lenses. And I don't think there is a universal kind of, mechanism to one problem. And the problem has to be kind of addressed and examined in a very specific context. I think when we talk about a lot of the urban issues, people tend to generalize the urban issues. Sometimes I think those generalizations can work to some extent, but I think in order to find the deeper structure and the logic behind the formation of the problems, one needs to get into the history and the kind of the more kind of broader social and cultural context. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Oh yeah, I think it's quite absolutely right. Even through the history of architecture, we see how theory and history works as a counterpoint to technology, and and constantly reshaping about the paths technology lead us. But then I think it's lead to next question to Nero. I see from your work, it's well, I think first it's unique because it's at the fundamental level, it's kind of isolated from the physical world, but at the same time, it's trying to have dialogues with physical environment, physical material properties, etc. But I also feel, well, both in your work and in David's works, David, if you want to jump in, please feel free. I see you all kind of value sensibilities and novelties very much. So in your work, kind of you try to develop techniques, procedures for different concepts in order to produce novel forms. So my question is, what's in your view when you consider the function or the purpose of producing novel forms in today's architectural discipline? Or what's the novelty of forms can contribute to architecture, why we need novelties, etc. Those kind of questions, if you like to respond.
Well, first of all, I think especially for me as a new emerging architecture designer, graduate from during the pandemic, and there's this anxiety of not able to use traditional sort of tools and procedures to formulate your architecture thoughts and ideas. So and also there's always an ongoing conversation about how architects are always living under the rock in terms of using technologies. We call ourselves as designers, but within our designer field spectrums, we see a lot of the people from other design careers are very much advanced in technology, not only in terms of how they fabricate their stuff, but also their procedures are much high and advanced. And my work, what I've been doing is not a new game for example, animators, for example, for video designers, but it's very much new, fairly new for architects to utilize this kind of a fresh thinking. And I think it speaks to the anxiety of having a conversation about what is a timely architecture thinking in this generation, right? Are we, because I think we can all acknowledge we are way past the Starchitects age already. Like those era has been gone, and they have made a lot of the impact on the world and in the architecture field as well. And now I think at least in my practice and my work, the way I teach my students are very much related to the conversation about how we need to be extremely conscious and cautious about what you put out in the field. Is this building up our culture? Is this taking information from our existing problems and step it up a little bit? Or it's completely in a world of itself? I think that's very much need to be addressed. That's why I'm very much involved in this, sensibility in terms of my workflow. And collaboration is something I really want to, emphasize as well. Not only the collaboration between me and the computer, the machines, but also the collaboration between a group of people and even your clients. I mean, just like what David said, I'm very much wanted to engage in constructing a physical building in some days, but I do see my own process is valuable in my own thinking process, and maybe my project, and both of my project and my practice is the workflow I produce out there. And the final project, if one day I have the pleasure of producing something physical in the architecture field, I consider that project as a collaboration between me and my client.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I also want to introduce to you guys Philip Yuan. Philip Yuan is the director of our Digital Futures and also the vice dean of college. Well, I think maybe we can have Philip have some final comments, but before that, I hope we could have more time to have dialogues between each other. But I think I know the time in the United States is very late right now. But I think it's worth it to see all your works are fully presented. I think that's all very inspiring. Maybe let's work it up here and trying to get in touch with the art later. So before we close it, maybe Philip, you could have some final comments and also for all of you guys have some words in the end. Philip.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank all the participants today to make remarkable lectures to Digital Futures. And this is the program background, we're in between 2 weeks. I think the weekend is about the young scholars. You make presentation, especially to the PhD consortium globally. Actually, we have like 15 PhD candidates here from Tongji. At the same time, we invited other PhD students from universities around the world participate. So the live stream is on YouTube, Bilibili, and Cross-Voxel, Metaverse, and also including different platforms. I think what we set up, Digital Futures, this is the 12th year for Digital Futures, and the platform, which is about the free and open education. It's like a metaverse of architecture school in the world. So we put around, I think, more than 300 lectures on the platform, and more than 400,000 viewers in the past few years who actually assemble these knowledge and these lectures to their research and their academic research and the design. Actually, I think that's a new ways of knowledge, the new understanding of knowledge. So I think the remarkable of today, I think the background of you guys, I'm here listening to all the lectures. That's great, and to have different perspective, understanding. I think some common ground. I want to make some comments. I think the most strong lecture, firstly, is about the subjectivity. I think Segal is really good at presenting a certain kind of a spatial experience based on his memory. Today is Father's Day. I think his lecture on the studio who grew up early, I think in the 1970s, right? It's really kind of presenting the process, the mindscape, and in from installation, I think, which really another spatial experience to us. It's not just for yourself, you present it to the other people. I think that's a valuable academic research through a project, as Wanya mentioned. I think it's a project, but actually, which is extremely important in the post-digital era. And what is the most important, the deepness of thinking, architectural thinking, and what is the most valuable contribution through this kind of progress representation can remark the people's mind through one project. I think that's a great, interesting to me. The subjective is from himself. And while when we go to David, I think extremely the subjectivity is on the object. I think the ways through simulation is also progressing, but the simulation can generate the geometry in different ways. It seems like random and arbitrary, but actually something hidden behind is the formation process actually give us new possibility of the human experience. I think it's a narrative to present the process of making, and in the ontological architecture research is really valuable. The subjectivity is based on the object of architecture, especially maybe the surface making progress is and the simulation and formation of this paper-based projects really meaningful and give us a lot of thinking and some, I think we should learning a lot from that. Well, Wang Liang is a good urbanism researcher, I think, from the collective subjectivity, which based on the social and cultural background, especially the block is, the super block is extremely important to the last 20, 30 years, what's happening here in China, which is like, the model is really strong to present a certain kind of, I think it's like panoption, I think from a small unit looking out the city, but actually the capital becomes the guard in the middle to looking at you from the window. I think it's a remarkable big installation, which can give us a lot of thinking through this very strong research and showing the collective subjectivity which influenced by the capitalism, which is a key part of the Anthropocene and post-humanism, and what that will influence and leading us to the future. I think right now is a special point to critically thinking on that. And Nirohi is a young generation. I think I quite appreciate you present your work, which is integrate both the material and immaterial intelligence. I think your name is a quasi-autonomy. That is quite different to the last generation. I remember in MIT, Stanford Anderson also write the same article in the journal of the Yale. I think it should be in the 80s, and also the same title, quasi-autonomous. His context is on the critical thinking on the modernism, but right now I think it's postmodernism or posthumanism. You gave the same title. I think rethinking on the initial logic between what is virtual, what is physical, and the integration of that can make a new creative process for the young generation. So I'm looking forward to see what's happening on your research. You are so young, but I think it's so meaningful and critical. So I believe this is a 12th year for us. At the very beginning, we'll focus very much on the technology itself, but afterwards, we think the social and psychological, and at the same time, the ethical problem is extremely important to the discipline. So Digital Future is like a platform, open platform for discussion and education. So no criteria is the only one right one. I think the open discussion and advanced debate, especially to PhD students, will be very meaningful and useful. So thanks a lot for your contribution. I think I really learned a lot from you. It's a remarkable event in the Young Scholar session. So thank you for that. I think it's really late, maybe the lunchtime and late night in the States. So thank you for your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Yuan. Thank you,
Professor Yuan,
for having us.
I just want to thank you again. It's almost 3.5 hours. Wow, it's really amazing to see all of you in this way. I think in the future, if we have a chance, we can meet in person, maybe in Shanghai. Yeah. Okay, I think let's close it here. I believe the session will lead to many other things, and let's keep in touch. Before we close the session, I just want to remind all the audience, about like 8 hours at 8 p.m. China time, we will have the last session, Innovative Structures and Materials. So also welcome to join us. And thank you again to David, Niro, Wang Yang for your presentation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to know you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Keep in touch.